Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where and when you're watching this. This is Lesson 26, Allied Leadership, following up on the videos already posted by Gabby and Nathan. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed those. I'm glad everybody's pressing on with this. Things seem to be going at least reasonably well. Right, if you're following along with the slides that are posted, I'll let you know I'm switching, moving on to course administration. Not a lot of time left, sorry, by the time this gets updated, but busier day than I thought, and I had some technical difficulties with my 352 stuff that slowed me down. But if you have a quick chance, Dr. Karen Roybal of Colorado College will be speaking on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo at 6 o'clock. That's put on by History Colorado. It's free, but it does require registration, so hit that link. I'm going to go ahead and move the peer review back to Saturday, the 18th of April. To reinforce what I sent out in my email, included in that email was a list of everybody alphabetically. Please just send a copy of your paper wherever you're at. I know you're not done. That's the point. Go ahead and send that to the person ahead of you on the list. If you're on the top of the list, send it to the last person on the list. If you absolutely have nothing done that anybody else can look at, first off, don't be shy. If it's trash, that's okay. All first drafts are trash. That's why you get help. But if you just don't have anything to send, just hang on to and forward whatever you get to the next person. That way everybody has something that they can review. And oh yeah, by the way, do send your review back to that person as well as posting it to Blackboard so I can take a look at it. Sorry that process has not proven particularly smooth. It's the sort of thing that when I planned it in the classroom, it probably would have been easy, but well, we're all learning about this remote stuff. No other changes to the administrative stuff, so moving on to jobs. This is a neat one. I've never worked for NGIA. I always want to say NGIS because it used to be the National Geospatial Intelligence Service. It's now been changed to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, so NGIA. I've never worked for them, but I have some friends who have, and they love it. You'd think of photo analysis and photo interpretation as being somewhat technical disciplines, but they teach you that. They have no problem teaching you how to look at the photographs and figure out what you're looking at. What they really want are your analytical and critical thinking skills to put those images into context. So if you're interested in intelligence work, remember it's not all just CIA. There's a lot of intelligence agencies here in the U.S. With all slightly different missions, but great opportunity. All right. Writing tips, semicolons. I like semicolons. You may have been able to tell from looking at some of my writing. But they're really useful bits of punctuation for two reasons. One, they're very useful in lists. Normally we separate items in lists with commas, and we still do that, but if the items in your list must contain commas themselves, then semicolons will really help clarify things. A good example here is a list of locations. Grammatically, you need to put a comma between a city or region and the country that it's part of, such as London, UK. There's got to be a comma in there. So your entire list could get very, very awkward very quickly if you were separating everything just with commas. So the semicolon really helps out here. But the more creative and writerly, if that's a word, way of using semicolons is to join two clauses. Now, to make this work, each one has to be a complete sentence on its own. So if you look at the example we've got here, which obviously is for my 352 class, I used the same example, is few expected any member of the EU to ever attempt to leave. You can put a period in there. That's a sentence. You're good right there. Brexit changed that understanding forever. Again, a complete sentence stands just fine on its own. However, you can combine them with a semicolon, and that really works well if you want to focus attention on contrast or contradiction, because first part of that tells you, oh, nobody ever expected this to happen. Oh, it did happen. It's a clever way of enhancing the level of contrast in your sentence. So give it a try. Just don't overdo it. Not every sentence. All right, moving on. Our topic assignments today is Allied Leadership. And like I said, if you haven't watched the videos by Gabby and Nathan, go ahead and do that, please. And enjoy those. They're all up on YouTube now, so you're good to go there. Today, Allied Leadership on Tuesday, today being Thursday, looking ahead to Tuesday. Oh yeah, another upper, Atrocities and Genocide with Garrett and Tristan. I don't ever seeing that being a talk show. No. Atrocities and Genocide with Garrett and Tristan, I think, will be just our videos, and it probably won't go further than that. So we'll look forward to that. And looking forward is probably maybe a stretch, but we will anticipate a great deal of learning. All right, well, Nathan has already talked about Warlord and Commander-in-Chief, focusing on Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt in particular. And Gabby talked to us about Brothers, Rivals, and Victors, Eisenhower, Patton, and Bradley, so looking at the American military high command, and Forged in War, looking at Roosevelt and Churchill and their relationship, which leaves me two very interesting books, Churchill's Generals, edited by John Keegan, and Old Soldiers Never Die by Jeffrey Perret. So let us start off with Churchill's General. Oh, man, a lot of glare there. Churchill's Generals, edited by John Keegan. John Keegan is one of the foremost military historians of recent generations. He's an incredibly prolific author, but he's also been very innovative. Part of that has a little bit to do with the ability to be a good television commentator, so he's gotten his name out there a bit more than some historians, but he's really a very effective one too. His breakthrough book, which has absolutely nothing to do with World War II, literally, but is well worth looking at from the historiographical point of view, is called Face of Battle, and it compares the experience of combat at Agincourt, Waterloo, and the Somme. So from the 100 Years' War, from the Napoleonic Wars, and from World War I. And it was published in the 1970s. It was really a revolutionary work at looking at what war was like from the perspective of the common soldier. So if you've got a future in military history, it's well worth looking at, or social history. Worth taking a look, but I digress a smidge. Churchill's Generals is an edited collection. Keegan collected a series of authors, a whole group of authors, and each of them writes a chapter on one of the important British generals of World War II. Keegan ties it all together with an introduction, but he did not write any of the chapters himself. Edited collections are interesting things. As always, the quality of the essays varies. Now, in this case, Keegan chose wisely. There aren't any particularly weak essays in here. Some would appeal to you or to me in particular more than others based on their topic or their style. One of the downsides of edited collections is that you can't always get your historians in harness. I'm sorry, that's a terrible pun. I'm actually the co-editor of a volume called Harnessing the Heavens, National Defense Through Space, that I put together with a colleague a number of years ago, but I apologize, that was an atrocious pun. Anyway, trying to get all your historians to work together can be challenging. A good example of this is if you read the chapter on General Alexander by Brian Holden Reed, and you read the chapter on General Slim by Duncan Anderson, Alexander was Slim's superior. He was his commander during part of the war, and you really don't recognize the two Alexanders. So Duncan Anderson's depiction of Alexander as Slim's boss is considerably more negative than Brian Holden Reed's depiction of Alexander in his chapter on Alexander. And there's a couple other points in the book where that happens. But it's in the nature of such things, of edited collections, that sort of thing's just going to happen. In most cases, the historians that Keegan has asked to write on the various British generals have done longer, maybe even full-length biographies of those generals. So what we have here is kind of a distillation. perhaps you could consider this kind of a Reader's Digest version. So if you're interested in learning more about any or all of the British High Command, well worth taking a look there, especially if you want to get a start on any of them and then use their bibliographies and notes by those individual authors to dig further into those individuals. It's also worth looking at as a pretty good model for this kind of collection. I do believe it's the only edited collection that's on our list for this semester. So it's a kind of history that's historical writing and historical presentation that's worth being somewhat familiar with as well. Okay. Leaving aside Churchill's generals, we'll turn now to Old Soldiers Never Die by Geoffrey Perret, a biography of General Douglas MacArthur, one of the most controversial figures in American military history, and someone who inspires a great deal of passion, positive and negatively. To some, he's a hero. To some, he is an absolute disaster as a general. And MacArthur's rather prickly and difficult personality can make that tough to sort out. It's interesting if you look at reviews of this book, scholarly reviews of this book. It's interesting. Most reviewers' opinions of Perret and his work line up neatly with their views of MacArthur. So if they really don't like MacArthur, they don't much like Perret's book. If they do like MacArthur, they like Perret's book. Perret's book is reasonably balanced. It probably comes down a little more positively on MacArthur's side in many cases than perhaps I would choose to do, but it's nevertheless well argued and well balanced, and even if you don't agree with Perret's judgments, you're going to find a good model for historical argument in them. In a work like this, it's somewhat synthetic. Synthetic not in the sense of being artificial, but synthetic in the sense of being synthesis. Since other authors have written substantial works on MacArthur, especially on various aspects of MacArthur's career, he relies heavily on secondary sources for putting together a full-length cradle-to-grave biography. That's not to say that that's all he does. He has also done substantial archival research, which is well worth recognizing. In fact, I'm just going to read this off a little bit to give you an idea of what I mean when I say substantial archival research. Let's see. He consulted archives at the Center for Air Force History at Bolling Air Force Base, the Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Library in Abilene, Kansas, the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library, Hyde Park, New York, the George C. Marshall Foundation, Lexington, Virginia, the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library, West Branch, Iowa, the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, the U.S. Air Force Historical Research Agency, Maxwell Air Force Base, the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library, Independence, Missouri, the Manuscript Division of the Library of Congress. Oh, that's a fun place to do research. If you ever have a chance to do research at the Library of Congress, leap on it. Great place. The MacArthur Memorial and Archives, Norfolk, Virginia, the National Archives, Washington, D.C., another treat. The U.S. Army Military History Institute at Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. Oh, I spent a lot of time there. Another great one. Sorry, I'm getting all nostalgic for doing research. Anyway, and the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. Unfortunately, he doesn't include a bibliography, simply his notes. So it's aside from those archival sources, it's more difficult to get a handle on everything that he consulted in his research. In writing a cradle-to-grave biography, you have to decide what aspects of your individual's life to emphasize. Is this a professional biography? Is this a personal biography? What gets the emphasis? And here, Perret puts a lot of emphasis on MacArthur's early life and career leading up to World War II because he argues that Douglas MacArthur, the son of a very successful general and Civil War hero Arthur MacArthur, actually, Arthur MacArthur and Douglas MacArthur are one of only two pairs of father and son recipients of the Medal of Honor that I know of, at least. Arthur MacArthur and Douglas MacArthur and Theodore Roosevelt and Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Sorry. I'm in a trivial mood today, I guess, but I digress, which is a digression from a digression, but back to the point. Because Douglas MacArthur, was the son of a general, he was raised on army posts, and he very early on, his parents gave him the idea that he was destined for greatness. And Prey argues that really, those two things really shaped his life. It was almost inevitable that he was going to be an army officer following in his father's footsteps, and it was almost inevitable that he was going to perceive his entire life as focused on greatness. There's fun little tidbits throughout. Famously, Douglas MacArthur's mother, when he entered West Point as a cadet, she took a room at the Thayer Hotel, which is the hotel that is just outside the gate of West Point, specifically requesting a room where she could see Douglas's cadet dormitory room, so she could see if his light was on and if he was up studying at night. Yes, that actually happened. So if you think you've got helicopter parents, maybe not, relatively speaking. She was a helicopter parent before there were helicopters. Prey balances neatly the personal and the professional, going through MacArthur's career, his excuse me, his moving through various posts, his action in World War I, culminating in his U.S. Army career, so it seemed, as Chief of Staff of the Army, where his reputation was besmirched by his role in the breakup of the Bonus Army during the Great Depression. He retired from the Army, seemingly ending his U.S. Army career, and went to the Philippines, where he was hired by the Philippine government to organize their military in preparation for Philippine independence, which was scheduled for the mid-1940s. Of course, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor caused FDR to recall Douglas MacArthur to active duty, bring him on active duty as both the commander of American forces and the commander of Philippine forces. And there's a substantial chunk of the book that concentrates very heavily on MacArthur's World War II performance as a general. He did not perform well at the beginning, but his talent for self-promotion and the unique circumstances of his stand in the Philippines enabled him to carve out a niche for himself. And at that point, Perret argues, experience actually made him into the general that he always claimed he was. That he did perform very well in the second part of World War II. The Philippine campaign was not a success for MacArthur, but his island hopping campaign through New Guinea and related islands up to the Philippines was very successful and is actually a model. He also moves on. He probably gives a little bit short shrift to what may have been the most consequential period of MacArthur's life, when he was the commander of occupation forces in Japan, and essentially, along with his staff, did much of the rewriting of the Japanese constitution and the reestablishment of Japanese civil society in the wake of Japanese defeat. He then, because he was the commander of Allied occupation forces in Japan, well, when the North Koreans invaded South Korea, he was drawn into that campaign. His command there was the high and the low. His attack at Incheon, Perret argues, and most people agree, was the single most brilliant moment of his career, to be immediately, relatively speaking, within a couple years, followed by the great disaster, his conflict with Truman, his inability to understand the relationship between soldiers and the president in a democratic society, and his firing. After he was fired in Korea, he gave a speech to Congress saying, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. But he actually did fade away, and then he died. So his speech, that he was giving that speech kind of expecting to be drafted as a presidential candidate, and still with great ambitions to accomplish more in his life. But he really did fade away into kind of obscurity. He remains a controversial figure arousing a lot of passion. I think Perret probably overstates it considerably to say he's the second greatest American soldier after Ulysses S. Grant. I would argue that there are a substantial number of generals who rank higher than MacArthur because while MacArthur at his best could be brilliant, at his worst he could be a disaster. And there's really there are no days of MacArthur's military career where he was just eh. It's really all up or down. If you're looking for a full-length biography of an important figure, Perret provides an excellent model, well worth looking at to see what kind of work it is. Perret does a very good job of straddling the line between popular and scholarly history. Now, we know scholarly history means footnoted, which he's got. Popular history generally doesn't, but when I say straddling the line between popular history, it's a very readable book. Published by a commercial press that you could really reasonably expect somebody who is not a history major or has not been assigned this book by a sadistic instructor, because, you know, yeah. I notice you all comment on how long the books are. I figured I'd better join in because I was feeling a little left out there. Anyway, still highly readable despite the length. And probably a very good model for if you're going to write full-length biography of important figures that you expect to sell beyond just university libraries and close family members. All right, wherever you are, I hope you and yours are healthy and safe. Keep listening to our public health officials for guidance in your area as to what's safe and what's not. Do your very best to take care of yourself and those around you. And we'll talk again soon. I look forward to seeing what you've got on the discussion boards. Bye.